Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Ernest Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. The Washington Huskies just landed the top available player in the transfer portal, but it came with a massive NIL price because Great Osobor, the former Utah State forward, has transferred to the Washington Huskies to follow head coach Danny Sprinkle. And I'm going to go over whether I believe Great Osobor will be the type player that Washington needs to help propel the Huskies to success in their first season in college basketball in the Big Ten, and whether I believe that high NIL price that they're going to be paying him is worth it at the end of the day. Now, Great Osobor, we know that he was a highly coveted player when he entered the transfer portal, but we also knew there was a really good chance he was going to follow his head coach to Washington because Danny Sprinkle, he was the head coach at Montana State when Great Osobor committed to the Bobcats when he came over from England because that is where he is from. And then when Danny Sprinkle took the Utah State job, Great Osobor ended up following him there. And now that Danny Sprinkle has left Utah State to take the Washington job, all in such a short span, Great Osobor is following him there as well. So he definitely trusts Danny Sprinkle to be his head coach. But other schools thought that they could lure Great Osobor away, including the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky was hot on his trail for around a couple weeks, but then it became clear that Great Osobor was not going to commit to Kentucky immediately after that interest was there, and he did end up visiting Kentucky. So then Kentucky went in a different direction because they decided to get Brandon Garrison, the former Oklahoma State center, and that ended up being a very smart decision for the Kentucky Wildcats because even though you could say maybe there was an argument that Kentucky still could have landed Great Osobor if they had continued just to pursue him, and he would have been a better player than Brandon Garrison was a sure thing, and he also was a lot cheaper of a player than Great Osobor because over on Twitter, Joe Tipton is tweeting out that $2 million plus in NIL and marketing deals are in place for Great Osobor this season, making him the highest paid known player in college basketball. Now, that is a key word on saying highest paid known player because we don't know if there are other players making more money than Great Osobor. That is very well a possibility, but if Great Osobor truly is the most expensive player in college basketball, that is kind of ridiculous. He is not worth being the most expensive player in college basketball. He wasn't even the best transfer portal prospect this offseason. There were other players that were better than him in the portal. Even though he's the best available player now, he definitely is not worth $2 million, especially if he is the most expensive player in the portal. Plus, it's kind of hilarious that Washington, if Danny Sprinkle now being the head coach was enough to lure Great Osobor to Washington, would they have really had to have paid him $2 million for him to go there? So that's a little bit crazy in my opinion. Kentucky was definitely smart to back off a Great Osobor, and the other schools that were in the running were Louisville and Texas Tech. And what's ironic as well is Louisville spent a lot of money to try to land him as well because they brought him in on Derby weekend, which is a huge weekend in Kentucky, and you would have thought maybe Louisville had a really good shot to land him. But at the end of the day, Great Osobor, it looks like, was always going to end up going to Washington, and they had a fantastic NIL deal in place. So even though you could say that's the downside of the transfer portal and NIL because players are kind of extorting these programs a little bit, these programs got a lot of money to blow, so it is what it is in that regard. But Great Osobor, you could say what you want about this entire process, but it's working out best for him, and he's a good basketball player. He's just not worth that much in NIL. But if Washington wants to pay him that much and Danny Sprinkle wanted him to join the club over at the Huskies that much, then I guess there's not much else you can do about that. But Joe Tipton tweeting out that Utah State transfer big man Great Osobor, the Mountain West Player of the Year, is committed to Washington. And now that's making a lot of Washington fans wonder, are the Huskies going to be able to compete in the Big Ten in their first season in the conference? Because the last few years have not been kind to Washington basketball. The last time they made the NCAA tournament was back in 2018-2019 in the second season of Mike Hopkins. And after that season, he never made the NCAA tournament again. To be fair, though, Washington has had some injuries recently because if you look at some of the returning players that Washington has from this past season, including Frank Kepnag, who was a former center at Oregon, he's been injured the past couple years. Another forward on the team, Samuel Urabi, he's been injured as well. And then Wilhelm Bradenbach, who transferred from Nebraska, he's had some injuries. So Washington's got several players coming back that have all been injured in the past. Those guys need to stay healthy. But then when you look at the additions Washington has made since Danny Sprinkle has gotten the job, Washington has the number 19 overall class in college basketball. And you can say that's very impressive. Maybe that can translate translate to a top 20 team, and they have a top 10 transfer portal class. Well, Washington also lost a lot of players from this past season's team, so you got to bring in a ton of players, and a lot of these guys aren't highly recruited. Now, yes, some of these guys might end up being better than we think, and they could end up translating to the Big Ten, but the Big Ten is going to be very competitive, and it's going to be Danny Sprinkle's first years. There's going to be some growing pains. If you look at the high school recruits they brought in, Zoom Diallo's a good player. He's a 6'4" guard. He's a 4-star recruit. I think he could be a guy that could come in and have success right away. Jace Butler, he's a 6'4" guard as well, who's a 4-star player. I think it might take him a little bit more time to develop than Zoom Diallo, but both those players are solid additions. Then going to the transfer portal guys, Great Osobor is by far the highest rated player, and he's probably more than likely going to be the best player on Washington's team next season. Then you look at a guy like Tyler Harris coming over from Portland. He was a 4-star transfer, a 3-star guy out of high school. He's a small forward. He could end up being a starter next season. I think he's a pretty solid addition. Then you got a guy in Chris Conway from Oakland. He's not rated at all, but maybe he could be a bench player for Washington next season. Lewis Courtwright, a transfer guard from Rhode Island. He probably will come off the bench. Then they got a center transfer from Oregon State, another combo guard from Butler who might be able to factor into that backcourt rotation. And then Makai Mason, who's a shooting guard from Rice. He was a 4-star transfer portal guard. He's a guy that can fill it up on some nights. So Washington's roster, looking at all these players, because their roster's full, they can't add any more players. I think it's still going to be one of the worst teams in the Big Ten next season. And that doesn't mean they're going to be bad. Most of the best teams in college basketball now, just like in football, they're going to be in the SEC or the Big Ten, or maybe the Big 12 and the ACC. And every other conference, it's a whole lot worse after that. The Big East is in basketball as well. There's a few decent teams in that conference every year. But if Washington is like the 11th best team in the Big Ten, they could still possibly sneak into the NCAA tournament if they have a good enough resume. But Washington might not even be that good. There's going to be a lot of competitive teams in the Big Ten next season, like Purdue again, even without Zach Edey, Illinois, Indiana did a great job in the portal. You also have Michigan State still with Tom Izzo, even though they haven't been as good recently. Ohio State, Michigan's done well in the portal this offseason with Dusty May. So there's going to be a lot of competition for good teams in the conference. You also have USC and UCLA who could end up having successful seasons in their first year in the Big Ten. You got Oregon as well. So I'm just pumping the brakes a little bit on Washington and the fans thinking that they're going to automatically make the NCAA tournament now in their first season in the Big Ten. Could they? I think it's definitely well possible. But how great Osobor plays is going to be key, because this past season at Utah State, he averaged 17 points per game and 9 rebounds, and he's not a three-point shooter. He only took 14 threes this past season at Utah State, and he made 3 of them. But the problem is, the only reason I mention that is because he's only 6'8". Yes, he's 250 pounds, and he plays bigger than his size because of his weight. It's going to be very tough for him in the Big Ten going up against Umar Ballo in Indiana, Aaron Bradshaw at Ohio State, and a lot of other bigs that are a lot taller and weigh around the same as he does. So I think his points per game could dip. I think if Washington's going to be a good team next year in the Big Ten in their first season in the conference, I think Great Osobor is going to have to keep up this level of scoring, and maybe he can do that. Danny Sprinkle, he's gotten better under him every single season, and maybe this will be another year that he takes a big leap, and Washington believes in him, which is why they're giving him $2 million in NIL, which I think is a little bit excessive, but still, I think that Great Osobor transferring to Washington gives the Huskies a chance to be good, but I think those other programs, especially Kentucky, knowing that they needed a lot of great players in the portal, they needed to split up that money to all of those players and not give one player an extraordinary amount of money. Washington's bringing in a lot of players this offseason that did not demand a lot of money, so I guess they felt that they could give Great Osobor that much, even though Washington football could have used some of that, because the Huskies are not looking like they're going to be as good this season in college football, but we'll have to see with them. But the Huskies in basketball, Danny Sprinkle, he's an up-and-coming coach, and a lot of people believe he's going to do great things with the Huskies. I think a lot of people feel that Washington is going to do the worst out of the 4 newcomers to the Big Ten in college basketball, but I do think there's a chance with Great Osobor they could be better than expected, but it's definitely not a guarantee. There's going to be a lot of competition in the conference next season, and Washington had to pay out a heavy price for a player that they more than likely were going to get anyway, and they don't know if he's going to be good enough to help lead the Huskies to success next season. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, whether you believe that Washington made the right decision to throw the bag at Great Osobor and give him a lot of NIL to transfer to the Huskies, and whether you believe that he will be a guy, plus with the new additions that Washington has made in the portal and the returners that they have from this past season, with Danny Sprinkle in his first year at head coach, now going to be in the Big Ten. Do you think that Washington will be able to have success, or do you think they're still going to struggle struggle in their first year in the conference. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.